I've worked as a nurse in multiple hospitals and facilities. Before the current hospital I work at, I worked at a geriatric hospital 30 minutes from my house. I had experience working with older patients before, so this was nothing new to me. Whenever she called me into the room, she'd be frightened of these alleged voices she was hearing. An hour or two later, I was in the linen room, stocking my cart, when I heard something in the room. It was a relatively small, dead quiet room. I had the door closed too. That's why hearing another noise was weird. I turned, saw nothing, and resumed stocking my cart. And that I didn't really want to be in that building anymore. I got as friendly of a response as I could have hoped for. I've never been diagnosed with anything, nor have I ever dealt with hallucinations of any kind. I'm aware of the effects of lack of sleep, but this was next level. I don't know if my mind started playing tricks on me from what Lena was telling me all night, but the feeling of the hand on my shoulder, the image of the smiling man behind the glass door, matching the description a patient kept giving multiple times, this was one of those once-in-a-lifetime, unexplainable supernatural occurrences. At least, I hope it was once in a lifetime. Then I felt what I can only describe to be a hand on my shoulder. I looked at my shoulder, jumped, and screamed, but there was nothing on my shoulder. Stories like the ones you hear on this channel are the reason why you need to be vigilant of your surroundings. But many people spend a majority of their time on the internet, so it's also important to be vigilant regarding your safety browsing the web. Guardio is an easy-to-use browser extension that, simply put, keeps you safe from scams and identity theft, so that you can do what you do online without worrying. By using Guardio, you'll protect your online browsing and information, avoid installing malware and falling victim to scams, and you'll get real-time alerts on any device when your information could be at risk. Everybody's encountered dangerous and annoying pop-ups while browsing the web. Guardio will immediately block any sites and providers that send you malvertising pop-ups, so you can browse in peace. There was no one in the room, yet I knew I felt something large basically grab my shoulder. Right now, Guardio is offering a special deal for my viewers. 20% off the monthly subscription if you use my link. So, if you want a clean and secure browsing experience, go to Guard, EO or Nightmare. Link in the description, and check out their affordable premium plan for full protection. I went out into the hall for a second to peek my head. No other nurses in sight, dead quiet. I had nothing else to do but resume what I was doing. I continued stocking the cart until it was full. Then I turned to face the door, and I fell to the floor and started screaming as my heart was immediately in my throat. There was a man dressed in black standing outside the door, looking through the glass, smiling. And the man in black that kept staring at her in the corner of the room. The man disappeared out of sight through the glass window of the door. I asked her what this man in black looked like, if he was smiling, and she looked at me, and I noticed her eyebrows point down as her expression changed to look the most focused I'd seen her the entire day. She asked, "How did you know?" And even with my heart still racing, I felt it skip a beat as she said this. She started screaming now, screaming, "Get me out of here, he's coming." The other nurses came in and tried to calm her down. I was switched to a different ward that night with someone else, and I eventually ended up going home early because I was just so freaked out. Seconds later, the door opened, and one of my fellow nurses came in to help me off the floor as I was hysterical. I asked her if she saw the man dressed in black. Her response was, "What man? There's no one else here." We checked all the rooms in the ward. There wasn't anybody dressed in black in there. Not gonna lie, it was creeping me out a little. I believed that in her mind, she was seeing and hearing these things, and I sympathized with her because I imagined them to be very scary. But still, I tried my best to calm her down and get her to go to sleep. I didn't want to turn on the TV to calm her down because I wanted to be courteous to the other patient in the room. I held Lena's hands and told her, "It's okay, breathe and relax. I reminded her that she wasn't here alone and that I was always just a call away. This seemed to do the trick. Lena relaxed for a while, and the next time I came into the room, she was asleep. I had been working at this hospital for only a couple of weeks, and you'll soon understand why. This was on my second to last shift at this hospital. Unbeknownst to me at the start of that night, I was working the graveyard shift, and I was running on negative hours of sleep. I was assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. The patients in this ward absolutely adored me. My presence as a young girl in her 20s among the residents of this ward, who were otherwise left to themselves to float around in their minds, I'm sure saw me as a breath of fresh air, someone who could tie them to the now, to the everyday. If you're just left to yourself, you can mentally go to other places, but with someone else in your space, you're tied to that moment in time. I was dealing with a number of patients that night, but one was a little more restless than the others. Her name was Lena. This was my first night dealing with her, and she kept telling me, anytime I'd enter her room, about the voices she kept hearing and the man dressed in black she kept seeing in the corner of the room. The other lady in her room requested her curtain be closed before my shift started so that Lena would leave her alone. She was a sweet lady that smiled whenever I was around her, but she didn't say much and was very forgetful. Since I started my shift around 9 p.m., most of the patients were asleep by 11, but not Lena. Once most, if not all, the patients are asleep, the night goes much slower. Time almost moves in reverse. My screams were loud enough to wake the entire ward. My screams woke Lena from whatever light sleep she must have been in, and when I came into her room, she started talking of the voices. This time the screams, which she didn't know were my screams. I texted the head nurse the next day that my next shift would be my last, that the experience traumatized me. Sponsor message. Before the next story, I want to thank Gardio for sponsoring this video. Being a YouTuber means hours of work online, so I wasn't too surprised when Gardio showed me all the existing threats on my system. Three years ago, I contracted bacterial meningitis. I live in South Florida. I don't believe there was an outbreak going on or anything, so I'm not sure how I caught it or who I could have caught it from. I started developing really bad symptoms: painful headaches, confusion, sleepiness, nausea, and lack of appetite. As I was mid-throwing up, I heard another voice from outside of the bathroom. I was told I was going to have to stay there for a few days to a week, given the severity of my symptoms. I woke up in this drowsy, lightheaded state and looked around the room. I told her about the weirdly vivid dream I had, and she left and told me that wasn't a dream, that my cousin came to visit me last night, which hindered my ability to recognize sleep from wakefulness, hence why I was so vividly hearing what David was saying. With a mix of the antibiotics and my already having weird audible hallucinations the day before, I don't think it's impossible that what I heard wasn't actually what was said, but I could be wrong. I left the hospital the next week. I called my husband to tell him what happened, and of course, he was livid and concerned. He came back again that night after work, but that day, I texted David, asking what the hell he was thinking visiting me, and how did he know I was in the hospital. My text delivered, but he ignored it. I sent a follow-up, telling him I heard all of his threats towards my husband, and that I'd be getting police involved, and minutes later, he responded, saying, "I never made any threats towards your husband. I was simply there when I heard what happened to make sure you were okay. You must have heard things in your sleep." I responded, "Stay out of my life, or I'll get police involved again." He didn't respond after this. I told her I don't have any cousins that live in the state. She looked more serious now and said, "Well, someone who said they're your cousin David visited you late last night." David was the name of my ex-husband. There was a chair pulled up in front of my hospital bed, but no one was sitting in it. It wasn't like that when my husband left. It was still the middle of the night, so I went back to sleep. Around 10 o'clock, my husband left to go home as he had work the next day. A nurse told me to call her if I should have any issues. Though I still felt like absolute death, I nodded off pretty quickly. I started having this dream where my ex-husband was in the room, over my bed, looking down at me, talking. He was saying horrible things about my current husband. He patted my head and said he was glad I was okay, and that he came as soon as he saw my husband left. He went into this rant about how he despises my current husband and wants to kill him. He kept rubbing my forehead, then left the room. I couldn't hear what it might have said, nor could I tell if it sounded the same as the other voice I heard. I was losing my mind. I wasn't diagnosed until I arrived at the hospital, and apparently, if untreated, what I had could be very serious, even fatal. The doctor told me the hallucinations part was rather unusual, but not unheard of. I was given antibiotics through a needle shortly after I arrived at the hospital with my husband. The doctor told me that I was fortunate to have come to the hospital so quickly, as if I had waited much longer, this could have had lasting effects or possibly have been fatal. But when the hallucinations started, that's when I knew I had something really serious. Lying sick in bed while my husband was at work, I heard a child's voice call, "Mom, from downstairs? We don't have any kids." I dragged myself out of bed to look down the stairway to call my husband's name. Of course, he didn't answer because he was at work. The headache I had from standing was too much, so I went back to bed. For a second time, I heard a voice call from downstairs. It said, "Hello." I picked up the phone and called my husband, freaking out to him into the phone that I was hearing a scary childish voice from inside the house, and that I thought I was hallucinating. He heard how distressed I was over the phone, and so he left work early to bring me to the hospital. While waiting for him to get home, I changed out of my pajamas, and while doing so, I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. My husband stayed with me for a few hours in the room. I often have bad dreams about my ex-husband because of how toxic and abusive our marriage was and why it ended, which I'd rather not include. I woke up the next morning to the nurse in the room. After explaining better, the nurse got a doctor, and the doctor told me the antibiotics may have caused delirium. I never told my husband about the threats I heard in my drowsy, half-asleep state because I didn't know if they were real or not. I once matched with this girl that I'm still friends with on Tinder, named Francesca. She seemed cool right from the bat. She had a sleeve of tattoos on her left arm, red highlights in her hair, and she had in her profile that she loved to work out. One of her pictures was taken on the rooftop of this cool-looking building with a sick view. I was glad I wore raggy jeans like she told me to because I knew I was going to rip them on something. I was paranoid we'd be found out because of her voice. Down the corridor we were in, it sounded like a door was opening or closing. Something echoed down the corridor to us. Once again, we scrambled. She led the way, saying she knew where to go. We ran for a few minutes through this maze of a building. Our presence was already made known to whoever was in there, so we turned on our flashlights and aimed them down below. And right below us, standing at the pillar, looking up at us, there was this 40-something-year-old man in a black Carhartt beanie, wearing a black jacket and black sweatpants. As we were running down the stairs in the shaft on the opposite side of the hospital, we heard the door a few flights above us open and slam shut, and then footsteps stomping down the steps. He somehow had followed us. We were hauling ass as if we were running for our lives. We made it back to the first floor, and we ran back to the opposite side of the hospital where we entered from. We went back to the basement and climbed through the broken window. The whole process of climbing through that window was haunting because I went out second, and I was afraid my legs would be grabbed at any moment. But I think by that point, we lost the man. Smiling at us and saying in this creepy, deep voice, "Come on down," as he was waving us to come down. I was truly freaking out. It seemed like we were being followed, and I wasn't sure if I would rather have it been the cops or someone else. Francesca and I got up, scared, and started walking back across the narrow piece of wood. I was even more scared of falling now than before. That was a complete nightmare, and somehow, us getting through it together created a sort of instant bond between us. We drove away from there and stopped at a Wendy's to get food and just collect our thoughts in the car. We chilled for an hour, just talking, and then I dropped her off. Francesca and I have stayed in contact through the years, and while we were romantically involved for a few months, we ended up just staying good friends. Neither of us ever returned to that hospital again. I had no idea what that man would do to us. As we were about halfway across, the man hurried out of the room below us through a door. He was most definitely going to try to catch us. We had to hurry. She led us to this mini outside spot. We weren't on the highest rooftop, but I guess we were on what you'd call the rooftop of this level. We stopped to catch our breath. The whole being followed thing was killing the vibe completely. Even she seemed concerned, and I looked to her as the expert with this place. She heard it too, and went silent. I asked her in a whisper, "Is it normal for others to be here?" And she said, "Sometimes, but not really." We turned off our flashlights and waited. We used our phone flashlights. We didn't bring any special heavy-duty lights or anything. We made it back to the stairway and ran up the stairs with our lights back on. When we were a couple of levels higher, we felt it was okay to speak at a normal volume again. This part was scary because she wanted to walk along these long, narrow wooden planks with a 10-foot drop below us. A fall from this height would cause injury, but I didn't want to seem like a underscore. I followed her across the sketchy, long wooden board until we got to the top of this pillar, where one board stopped and another one started. We sat on this pillar to just chill and talk, with our legs dangling over the edge, overlooking the darkness below. Francesca told me the police never come in here, so it may have been other explorers. But the weird thing was, there was no sign of another light in that corridor. Nobody normal would be walking in the dark. She seemed to know this whole hospital like the back of her hand. She led us to the stairway to the upstairs. I gotta say, being alone with one other person in a place like this at night was very scary, but I had no idea how scary it was about to get. I asked her where it was, and she told me it was some abandoned hospital on the edge of town that is super cool to explore at night and super easy to get into. There's usually one cop patrolling the huge parking lot at night to deter trespassers, but she said it was super easy to circumvent. She came up with the idea of us going there together as our first date of sorts, if you want to use the word date. I was totally on board with it. She seemed cool, and it seemed like a cool, different kind of way to meet someone, as opposed to the usual, "Let's get drinks." I picked her up from her house 10 minutes away, then we drove the 20 minutes to get to the hospital. Those 20 minutes gave us a nice chance to get to know each other a bit and get comfortable with each other's personalities for a little. When we got to the hospital, she told me to park on this dead-end street, hidden by a bunch of tall bushes, which was a 5-minute walk to the inside of the hospital. We hopped this little barrier separating the road from the hospital parking lot, and then we jogged across the wide-open lot towards the grass, right next to the entrance she said she always used. She led us to this broken window to the basement of the hospital. It seemed kind of creepy, but I signed up for this. On the first floor, Francesca kept talking so loud that I almost wanted to tell her to shh. Suddenly, there was a bang, much closer to us now. We both scrambled in the dark. I followed her barely able to see. Then we heard sounds echoing from the exit stair shaft where we just were. Someone was coming up the stairs. After a few minutes, we relaxed a bit and went through this broken window into the ceiling of this one large room. It was creepy in there, and I thought we were all alone until there was a sound from below us. It sounded like someone walking. I asked, "Are you police?" He disregarded my question as if he didn't hear me and repeated, "Come on down," with his creepy smile. We made it across and tried to get out of there, knowing that man was dangerous. We ran back across the parking lot back to my car, and when we made it, the first thing we did was lock the doors and catch our breath again.